Okay, so today I'm on the Skype with Mark Rhoden in Melbourne, Australia. Thanks very much for agreeing to talk to us today, Mark. Can you describe what it is you do for a living?
Sure, I'm a punter, a race analyst, and I sell a subscription service as well. So they're all interlinked. The analysis leads to the punting and the tipping, I suppose. But it's yes, it's all racing and punting focused.
Okay, so you told me that your father was a serious semi-professional punter. How did he operate? How much did you learn from him?
Quite a lot, actually. He was a school teacher, but he bet quite seriously on the side and used it as a source of income rather than a hobby. He was influenced by a man called Don Scott, who wrote a series of books in the 70s and 80s out here in Australia. Basically outline his theories on rating horse performance using weight primarily. And that influenced an awful lot of people, and my father was one of them. And then he used what he'd learned from those books, added a time element to it, which he'd learned from another source, and then started keeping his own ratings on Melbourne horse racing. It was he was focusing on in those days. And he used that to price and bet on racing, and did it quite successfully for a couple of decades.
Was that something that you got interested in as to what he was up to from an early age?
A very early age. According to my mother, my first words were "they're racing," so it was going to be pretty hard for me to get away from it, it appears. But you know, as a small child, I was just interested in the sport. I really loved the sport, but I was taken by the betting side of it from a young age too. And I suppose having that example of my father as a successful punter, because he won every year. I think he won every year but one for about 20 years when he was betting seriously. That certainly piqued my interest that this could be something I might want to do at some stage along the track as well.
And was he happy to sort of impart his knowledge, or was he a bit worried that his son might become a serious punter?
It doesn't appear so. He's actually joked in more recent times that his method of parenting would probably be frowned upon in more modern times. But I used to go to the races with him. I was going every week with him, but from the age of about 12, every Saturday at least. So no, he certainly didn't discourage me in any way, and he taught me a great deal, especially as I got into my teens and I wanted to take it a bit more seriously and learn some of the techniques that he used. Yes, he gave me a great deal of help.
Okay, so that leads me nicely on to my next question. I was going to ask you where he plied his trade. So he was an on-course punter, was he?
Yes. He had to work during the week, so he'd occasionally be having bets off course at the TABs we have out here during the week. But there were very, very few Saturdays he wasn't at one of the 4 metropolitan tracks down here in Melbourne.
Okay, so you started to work for on-course bookmakers from quite an early age. Was that a natural progression from going to the races and meeting these guys?
Yes, it was. I had some friends who were getting some work with bookmakers as well. That sort of pushed me into it. After high school, I went to university and started an arts degree, majoring in English and history, which is quite a different path from the one I ended up adopting. But after I left university, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Like a lot of people, I suppose, at that age, I had a series of more or less menial jobs that didn't really excite me that much. I was working part-time at the races and just waiting for something to come along, I suppose.
How many courses would there be that you could work at in your area at that time?
Well, there's the 4 tracks actually in Melbourne and its suburbs, but there were, I couldn't tell you exactly how many, but 15 or 20 within 1 or 2 hours of Melbourne in the car as well. So when I was working for bookmakers, it was occasionally in the city, but quite a lot of them were country and provincial meetings, 1 to 2 hours out of Melbourne. But even in the 90s, there would have been 6-7 days a week of racing. So there was, plenty of opportunities to ply the trade.
Okay, so you came from a background where your father was a successful punter. I'm assuming you were quite successful as well, sort of learning from him. What did you learn about punters when you started working for bookmakers? Were you quite surprised how some of them used to carry on?
I don't know. I think because I've been going to racetracks from such a young age, I was pretty au fait with how punters behaved, and I certainly wasn't a successful punter straight away as a younger man. I was a lot less disciplined, I'd have to say. It took me a while to get a handle on that sort of thing. Yeah, when I was working, it was just more of the same really when I was working for Bookmakers on track, because to me, the racetrack was such a natural environment to me. I've been to, if I was going to the races 40, 50, 60 or more times a year from the age of about 12, I was pretty used to it. And yeah, when I started working for bookies, there wasn't much the punters could throw at me that would surprise me, I suppose.
Were there many punters on course that you would describe as professionals that used to beat you all the time? Over time, I should say.
Yeah. Some of the bookmakers I worked for were smaller, so they were doing all in their power to sort of avoid that sort of business and play the more recreational end. I'd say if you're going to the track on a Wednesday or a Thursday, for instance, at one of the provincial meetings, and there were guys there betting in big sums in cash, you could be pretty sure that they weren't doing it for fun. And in the smaller crowds you'd have midweek, they'd obviously stand out more. At the weekend meetings and at the big carnival meetings, you'd have massive crowds on track. And look, I probably would have been working in a ring that was either on a front lawn or out the back somewhere, just dealing with the the fivers and tenors and the small recreational end of it. But those professional guys certainly stood out at the smaller meetings at the quieter times of the year.
Okay, so then you started a 17-year career with what you describe as corporate bookmakers. Why did you go in that direction rather than try and follow a career on course?
I think by the late 90s, there wasn't enough work to just keep working on track as any sort of career. It was, I think there were very few, even then, full-time. There would have been only a handful of full-time bookmaker staff, clerks who could do it 5 or 6 times a week and make a good enough living. I would have struggled to get more than 2 or 3 days work a week, and obviously had to do another full-time job as well. And the opportunity to move to Darwin came up, and at the age I was, which was about 24, and not having an established career in anything really that I wanted to do down in Melbourne, to have an opportunity come up in horse racing, which was my great passion, was a no-brainer. It was just too good to pass up, I thought.
So what was your first role?
Well, it was pretty clerical, and it was not particularly high paying either. So I got a job with a company called IAS in Darwin, which was one of, if not the first, the second, what I'd call corporate bookmaker, which is a bookmaker just like you'd know them in the UK, off the course. And in those days, bookmakers in Victoria and New South Wales and the other states weren't even allowed to be partnerships. They were sole traders and had to be on the course. So there was different legislation in the Northern Territory where Darwin's situated, and this is where companies could take bookmaking licenses. Anyway, IAS was one of the early ones of those, started by a guy called Mark Reed, who'd been a very successful bookmaker and punter on both sides of the fence in Melbourne and Sydney through the 80s and 90s. But he'd seen the writing on the wall as to which way the on-course bookmaking industry was heading. He'd been, held huge sums of money betting on the rails in Melbourne and Sydney, but he could sense by the mid-90s that it was drying up, and that he had to evolve if he wanted to be as successful as to continue to be as successful as he had been. He was going to have to make a move, and he got a license in the Northern Territory, and away he went. And I entered an ad in the paper, basically, got a very much a clerical role at first, which was basically answering phones and entering bets in the machine and that kind of thing. As I said, for not a great wage either. But after, it was only a matter of a couple of weeks that not that I got sick of that, but it was, I wanted something a bit more engaging and fulfilling. So I just started pestering people, asking if I could give them any help with their analysis or trading or that sort of thing. That they had a room full of racing analysts up there in Darwin who priced all the meetings around Australia. And I just managed to get my foot in the door with those guys, and pestered enough people that they started giving me small roles to do some small country meetings and that kind of thing. And it took off from there.
Okay, that leads me right on to the next thing you told me, that you learned the game inside out, bookmaking, trading and punting, from some great mentors. Can you tell us the biggest lessons you learned, and from who, if you like? What were the most important things they taught you?
Yeah, okay. Well, it was wide ranging. The two main people I learned from in that era were the boss, Mark Reed, and probably his chief analyst, a guy called Jared Toomey, who taught me a hell of a lot. And a lot of people who came through IAS at that time would say the same thing. He knew the game backwards. He was a tremendous teacher. As to what specifically, IAS had a method of form analysis, which was their own. They had their own database. They were very big on watching video replays. And yes, you're sort of trained from scratch how to do the form and assess races their way. You know, it was very much done in a standardised way. There was room for individual input, but there was rules you had to follow. I thought I had a pretty good handle on how to approach it, but you know, once you start doing it, it's then that you realise how little you really do know. And I was basically starting from scratch, but I picked it up reasonably quickly, I think, which was great. And it was due to the assistance I got from those guys, but also being around an environment like that where you're 6 or 7 days a week just surrounded by other people talking racing all the time, talking form analysis, talking pricing, betting, just being immersed in the environment. Yeah, I'd say within 6 to 12 months, I'd learned an awful lot, which really was enough to kick me off on my career.
Okay, so I'm assuming that they were doing all that work to price up races accurately to take punters on head on. Now, would that have totally become irrelevant with the advent of the exchanges?
It's certainly less relevant. In fact, I would say that's why I was made redundant at the end of 2016, and it's because I was basically an old school form analyst and pricer, and the need for people like me was just less and less important as time went on. But that's the very end compared to the very start. The interesting thing about IAS is they punted as well. They priced races to have an accurate market to bet to when they're taking on the punters. But if we had a view that was different from the market as to the price of a horse, especially a favourite, that we would go and back it ourselves. Not just lay off the bets we'd taken. Sometimes, especially if, say, a smart punter had backed one of these horses and we thought the price was good, we'd lay off his money and go with them for something as well, which was a very aggressive way of trading. It was fairly rare, I think, especially among corporates. And it's almost unknown now, or totally unknown now, I would say.
Was it an eye-opener to you how many punters were very clever and used to win? I mean, did winning punters get accommodated?
Absolutely. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, yeah, it was almost a point of pride that we would, they couldn't get on for whatever they wanted at any time, but they would be, if we'd quoted a price, we were sort of duty bound to give them a decent bet. And so, depending on our opinion of the horse, that could mean to lose up to, $20,000, $30,000 or more, especially in a big meeting like Melbourne Cup Week, it might be even more than that. And this is not to recreational punters with a lot of money, this is to winning punters. And the market was big enough and could absorb enough of our laying off action that it was possible to do now. But the bookies over here have certainly put their shutters up to each other in terms of trading with each other. So that approach is been gone for 5 to 10 years now, I'd say.
And that's gone for the same reason? You think that the betting exchanges?
Yes, although I just think the bookmakers now are less inclined to lay off at all, unless they had some massive liability on a multi or something. They'd rather just play the recreational end of the market and let the overround sort it out.